Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here today with Angela Alberty, who is the co-founder and VP of Business Development for myBasePay. You probably know her as, the gig economy specialist and advocate. She's all over LinkedIn sharing all kinds of cool things. So today we're going to be talking about top of mind trends for staffing firms in 2021. This relates to the great rehire, to the expansion of benefits your staffing firm can offer to your clients. So we'll dive into that here shortly. But before we get started, I want to share just briefly, Angela really has studied the workforce trends and shifts for her entire professional career over the past decade now, and really has helped companies in a lot of ways, everything from business development to marketing to operational oversight, which has led to really hundreds of these strategized implementation efforts that's impacted thousands of temporary workers across the globe. And she recently helped to co-found myBasePay, which is an organization related to helping staffing and recruiting industry companies in their most critical areas of managing the temporary workforce, from funding to compliance to administrative oversight and all sorts of fun things in between. But we will get more into some of these cool topics here in a moment. Angela, welcome.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I am so excited and thrilled to be here. I've listened to some of these fireside chats, and they definitely are fire, as the cool kids would say. But thank you for having me.
Great. So let's go ahead and dive in. You do such a good job of keeping your finger on the pulse with so many things related to the gig economy. And so can you share a little bit more about the great rehire and really the revamp needed for staffing agencies in this year of anticipated growth?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we look at when we are projecting where the trajectory is going to go is statistical information and how that's actually trending. So we are embarking upon what many analysts, and myself included, are coining as the year of the great rehire. It's the bounce back. It's the rebounding after this monumental year of 2020. So initially we started to see this coin phrase probably at the end of 2020, but really it's living up to the hype. And the reason why is because when we look at factors like temp and contract employment and the continual increase, we see figures that major companies like the Ronstads and the Manpowers of the world are posting when it comes to year over year growth. We look at the unemployment index and the jobless claims. All of these triggers are pointing to the fact that we are really embarking upon a strong year of hiring ahead of us. And I think one of the things that are top of mind subjects for any person that's in the executive space, that's in the talent space, and particularly in the staffing and recruiting spaces, talent pool and the demand for talent, and how do they properly curate that talent pool, because things are going to get really exciting. And we see that. I mean, you talk to recruiting and staffing professionals all the time. And when my recent conversations have really consisted of, we have more recs than we can handle. We need more talent. So what is going to be the steps needed to properly curate that talent pool and really be part of this bounce back that we're anticipating?
Absolutely. And it's so funny to see how different industries and different types of roles stayed really hot and in demand even throughout the last year, and some saw such a decrease. And so just to see where these trends shake out in the coming year. And so as we talk about advocacy around the external and temp workforce, what do you think is important for people in general to keep in mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I have been, and I always like to include this with any conversation that I'm having with staffing and recruiting professionals. You and I, 9 times out of 10, we didn't grow up wanting to be in staffing and recruiting. This is an industry that finds you and you land on it. And if you know it and you play it well, you do very well in it. So I've actually been on the phone with enough temp workers, and I've run the payroll. I've gone through the periods of the year, which are typically very warm and fuzzies, like holidays and the spring breaks. And more often than not, temp and contract workers have to really allot for savings because they don't get things like paid time off or a benefits model. So when we were constructing, myBasePay, one of the things that we wanted to standardize was the opportunity for temp and contract workers to have access to these sorts of benefits that seem fundamental to you or to I, but so, they can take a day off and get paid for that. And I also think that there's other values to it. Yes, it allows you to respond to temp and contractors, because oftentimes, just let's be real, they get treated as second class workers. But also, it allows you to curate and have that competitive edge so that you can compete with Robert Half down the street. And from a marketability standpoint, how powerful it is for
Yeah.
an agency to have a benefits model. Because if you're talking to somebody that is perhaps on the fence of going temp and contract, they're
Mhm.
probably on the fence because they don't have access to benefits and they don't have access to PTO. Very fundamental things. So proper talent pool curation, but to that end, we're living in a highly evolving world. And we have a new administration that's in office now who may be more restrictive or maybe looking to standardize things that we see happening at local and state levels when it comes to paid time off, for example, when it comes to ACA compliance. So it
Right.
keeps you compliant. It keeps you ready for what could happen from the regulation standpoint. It allows you to curate a talent pool. It allows you to have that marketability in your talent pool curation. But you're also treating workers with very fundamental things that, at least in my opinion, I believe people should have access to.
Yeah, definitely. When I think of our sister company, they have a HR consulting division, and they're placing individuals at a mid to senior level uh, pay rate, right? And so
Yeah.
some of those individuals, like they're coming in, and when you think about high level HR consulting, benefits are included. But when you think about other types of more temp to hire roles, I think it's far less common to have that. So are there
Yeah.
certain industries that you're seeing that right now, if somebody's placing somebody on site, whether it's a picker packer or whatever that might look like, that they do not have access to benefits versus industries and roles that usually do? Like, are you seeing a big
Well,
spread between the types of roles?
ACA really changed a lot of things. I think it shook the industry. I was probably a couple years into the space when ACA happened in 2015. It
Mhm.
did allow for at least a minimal form of benefits coverage
Yeah.
at the affordability standard. So regardless of what kind of worker it is, if you are meeting to that volume threshold, which is 50 workers or more on your payroll, you have to extend some form of benefits. But you are absolutely right. I mean, the benefits vary from industry to industry. So me saying that is going to be a lot harder for somebody that's a staffing owner, perhaps of manufacturing or LI, because those markups usually historically are much more competitive. I mean, at that volume, you are dealing with a manpower down the street
Right.
that has buying power to get much more competitive. And sometimes you're dealing with pennies on the dollar, and you simply cannot afford that. The benefit of outsourcing these responsibilities and delegations to perhaps a back office service provider is that you get the benefit of buying power. So we
Mm.
launched myBasePay trade. These workers do have access to PTO. They do have access to health insurance. It's not as robust as a professionals package, but it is there. So it's also a consideration.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's so fun to see, your background and your passion in this space, and now, helping to create a company that's addressing those. And obviously none of these things change for every staffing firm out there overnight, but I think about just all of the other advancements in this industry, going from people physically always using paper to spreadsheets to ATSs. Like, there's just so much evolution in every area of staffing. So it's good to see it kind of catch
Yeah.
up in that area on the benefit side.
Yeah, including in the world of back office, which, I think
Right.
staffing and recruiting is historically a very uh, sales driven, front facing sort of industry. But now, these things are transcending into the monotonous, the reputation that the back office has had.
Right, right. And actually, I'd love to hear more about just overall the risk exposure of staffing agencies when it comes to having a business model that involves the back office. Because it's one thing to land a new client, it's one thing to find the talent, but what happens kind of behind the scenes that makes it all run smoothly together? So, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's no shadow of a doubt that the greatest risk and the greatest risk exposure for any agency out there is always going to be in the back office. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to get audited by the IRS for your ATS system. You're going to get audited by the IRS for your classification processes. And quite frankly, the world of payroll is probably one of the most regulated markets out there right now in the US. I think OSHA has this beat, but really knowing the regulations and the minuscule details when it comes to not just successfully running a back office, but more so compliantly running a back office is what, when I speak to staffing agency owners, that's what keeps you up at night. Did we classify that worker properly? Are we paying the taxes as we should in that particular county in Ohio? Because, remote work is a real thing. Are we going to be able to payroll somebody in Wisconsin now or Minnesota? So every single locality, municipality, state, and even at a federal level has its own unique way of doing things. And if we look at the makeup of what is a back office, it really begins from the moment a contract worker is identified. Are we going to onboard them properly? Are we collecting time as we should? Are we paying them as we should? Are we classifying them as we should? Are we allowing for the taxes as we should? So the exposure just grows greater with the type of workers that you have out on assignment, the environment in which they're working with. Even if, we look at what's happening in the IT sector, which historically is probably something that's considered on the safer side in terms of work performance. But now there's huge risks associated with IT as well, because we have people getting labeled as independent contractors.
Right.
We have staff aug agencies that are holding H-1B statuses, which come with their own bag of tricks. So, there's definitely a risk there. And I think if we look at the makeup of a staffing agency, the back office could probably really be made up of up to the support system of 12 different vendors. Because you have your payroll provider, your onboarding provider, your timesheet collector, your pre-screening provider, your invoicing, your collections. I mean, you just continually add and add and add. So maybe you even have somebody you're outsourcing unemployment claims to. So, the dependency, the exposure can lend to other vendors that you're utilizing, how you synchronize each system. So, at least with myBasePay, there is an opportunity to have one front-facing software and a party that absorbs that liability. But it really is one of the greatest exposures out there right now if we're looking at the operational stack for staffing agencies.
Absolutely. And my wheelhouse and passion so solidly is around marketing, and that's a lot easier to touch and feel, right? It's like, what are we doing on our website, on social? And then it gets a little bit less easy to touch and feel when it's things like SEO or how you're building out, your tech stacks and things like that. But in the world that I know well, it's a lot easier to stay on top of trends because it's trend based, right? It's best practice based. And yes, there are certain things that could get you in trouble if you're doing it wrong, but it's not the same legal risk that the back office introduces. And so where do you advise staffing firms if they're new to the business, let's say, or if they're just like, man, there are always so many changes to all of this, like where do you go to keep your finger on the pulse? Is it SIA? Is it ASA? Are there certain places just to make sure that that people are kind of keeping compliant? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Staffing industry analyst is a wonderful resource for regardless of whether or not you're a startup. It's kind of like what Gartner is to tech.
Sure.
I mean, that's how I view SIA as a solid resource. Also, SHROOM, the Society of Human Resource Management, has a lot of great fundamental things. But I think if I was a staffing agency owner, one of the things that I would be looking at is, am I ready for that kind of liability? Am I ready for that kind of exposure?
Right.
What can I do to get my funding down pat? Because you need a lot of money to fund payroll. One of the things that, a lot of staffing agencies don't necessarily know out the gate is, let's just run through an example. You have 5 people out on payroll. Each one of these workers, maybe you're getting paid $50. They're working 40 hours every week. You need 20 grand every single week just to pay the workers before you see your first payment on an invoice, maybe 45 days later, more historically 60 days later. So, understanding the liability, understanding the funding, and third, get a lawyer, get some form of general counsel that would help you and really solidify the processes that you're looking to establish to remain compliant, because it only takes, and it sounds terrible, and it's not to like, make this thing scary, but you get audited once and it's one mistake and
Oh
it
my
is
goodness.
businesses, right?
Right.
So
Right. And
I think those would be the three areas where I would start.
no, that's so helpful. And I think about groups like Tech Serve Alliance, and they
Mhm.
offer, sign up for this and you get access to an attorney and a lawyer that understands this world. And you don't need to keep somebody on retainer that costs how much, whatever that costs, right? Like
Correct.
there are so many resources in this industry to help with that. So I love that call out.
Yeah,
Um, so
absolutely.
another big area that's shifting in the staffing industry that we're chatting about is really just how more and more companies are determining, well, we just want to bring the hiring in-house, right? So what happens when your client says, you know what, we're not going to be using staffing firms. We're really going to cut down on how many staffing firms we use because we're going to direct source our candidates. We were chatting about ways that staffing firms can position themselves as still being incredibly valuable, even if a client makes that decision. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's add a little bit of context to this. If you are an SIA member, all you have to do is go into the website and look at the listed topics that people are buzzing about this year. And absolutely, without a doubt, direct sourcing and the concept of direct sourcing is here. So
Mhm.
that means that enterprise organizations are really looking to ways that they can internalize their own staffing efforts when it comes to temp and contract. We see that happen on the direct hire front, and we know that that's there. So, when I speak to some agency owners, this is considered a threat. Absolutely, because they're looking to internalize efforts, which means that they could be omitting the reliance or as much of a reliance on a staffing partner. But just in general, my feeling with staffing and recruiting is that this is a resilient industry. We've gotten threats since I think we were even before we were, born.
Yeah.
But what has the internet done? What did job boards do? What did monster.com and indeed.com do? What did the MSP and the VMS do? What is AI going to do? So these are all things, and through each one of these examples, it's just a matter of transcending and evolving your service model offering. So
Mhm.
if you're a staffing agency owner, you've probably heard of the phrase of payrolling. It's very similar. I mean, staffing agencies, payroll candidates that they don't find themselves all the time. But it really is a matter of tapping into that segment of your complementary service offerings and expanding on that so that you can go to your client and say, okay, Mr. Client, you want to go ahead and implement a direct sourcing program? Let me be your managed direct sourcing provider so that you can payroll candidates through us. And also knowing that no matter how many requisitions they try to internally source, they're not going to be able to fill all of them. And more than likely, they're not going to be able to fill all of the harder to fill roles.
Right.
So if you can build a way to expand on your payroll service offerings and also have this arsenal of candidates that you know are hard to fill roles, then you've come up with a very good strategy to not only become flexible, but to capitalize on what is the direct sourcing movement.
Absolutely. And are you seeing the direct sourcing movement more common in certain industries or certain types of staffing? Or does it seem to be
No, I
across?
wouldn't say certain industries. I would say the bigger the company, the more the
Yeah.
consideration. So if you're dealing with small to medium sized businesses, this may not be conceptually something that they're looking to implement. But these monster companies out there, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000, and we all know what it's like to set up as a supplier with those guys. But definitely, those are, I think, companies that are more so going to look to see what they can do.
Sure. No, no, it's so true. And these are such good things to keep in mind. And Angela, this has been a fun conversation. I know I enjoy following you on LinkedIn and seeing videos that you share, especially as there's just live time happenings going on in this space with the gig economy and just what's happening there. Is there any other topic or thoughts you'd love to leave our crew with? Anybody who's listening, if they're a staffing firm owner or leader saying, man, I really just want to keep on trend of what's coming down the pipe, want to be smart in business decisions. Is there anything else you can think of?
I would say there's probably two things that I would have top of mind. People always, and you hear this phrase so often. It's the future of work. What is the future of work going to be like? I think it's definitely going to be something that we look to go towards a direction of a more on-demand systems offering. So more a plug and play. So what can your business do to evolve and tap into that sort of response strategy? But to me, the future of work ends and begins, and I've said this in a couple of different shows that I've done, it ends and begins with the worker. So there's never been an easier time for you or for any other person out there to find different forms of work than there is now. So if you can set yourself apart in the manner that you treat the workers and what you can do to offer more robust and different sorts of perks, then you're headed towards the right direction. And then the second thing I would say is we're headed towards we're in a new administration. So it's something that we definitely want to keep an eye out for, is how is that going to impact the human capital professionals out there when we have an administration that could be really changing the way that we manage workers from a regulatory standpoint. All signs are pointing towards that. So if you just type in Angela Alberty on LinkedIn and you want to keep up to date of how things are changing and how you could be impacted as an organization, I'd love to connect with you. I like to post videos. I'm kind of a geek about this thing. I don't know how the heck I ended up being a geek about back office and regulatory things, but here I am. So those would be the two things that I would walk away with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This is so insightful. And, if anybody listening to this, or if you share it with someone you think could be valuable to, if you have questions, definitely reach out to us. I definitely nerd out more on the marketing side of things, but I'm learning more and more every day about what Angela is sharing, but she's absolutely expert when it comes to this. So thanks, Angela, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kelly. Thanks so much. I always love catching up with you. So thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you later, everybody.